So welcome everybody. Welcome to our first Society Robots and Us for 2021. And I'm looking forward to a discussion that is going to help us set the agenda for robotics in 2021 and beyond. And I think it's very important that as our technology emerges, we address the issues around how it is affecting society and how it can have an impact, both positive and negative, on society. And so we have wonderful conversations. And we started doing this event in the early days of the COVID era, and we were focusing on, so what actually does it mean? How can robotics and roboticists help in this time of pandemics? And it was a fantastic conversation, and we decided that it was time to expand the topic and to start to talk about things like racism in robotics, global challenges and how we address those. So it's one of my favorite events, and I'm delighted to see so many people joining us now. My role is to warm up for the speakers and the rest of the discussion. I'll just give everybody a little bit of housekeeping as to how this is going to roll. I will introduce each of the speakers and they will each share their thoughts with us. We will move from speaker to speaker. If you have questions specifically for one of the speakers, put them into the chat and I can forward the question on. And then we'll start the general discussion once every speaker has had their time to speak. And in the general discussion, well, I'm looking forward to finding out, what is inclusive robotics? Why do we need it? How do we go about getting it? And even beyond that, what is the robotics agenda for 2021 and beyond? What are the questions that we haven't thought to ask, perhaps? And perhaps it's time that we started those discussions. And in the spirit of that, I would like to acknowledge that I and many of us are here on the lands of the Mawutma Ohlone people, who are an unrecognized First Peoples tribe of California. And I'm very pleased to actually see more events starting to acknowledge the First Peoples as part of how things happen. And so I've given us the introduction and the housekeeping. I'd like to say a little bit about our speakers and we'll kick off the rest of the discussion. And I see there's, Alka's pointed out an event that's coming up in the chat, a Spring Founders Circle for the Responsible Innovation Labs. I would like to also say Silicon Valley Robotics and Women in Robotics have regular events. So in Women in Robotics, we have a weekly book club, for example, and we have a Slack community where we can meet together online as well as having local chapters. If you're interested in joining that, and I'll pop the link into chat, please go to womeninrobotics.org, and it's not a HTTPS site, it's still a HTTP site. So if you can't find it, that's the reason. But if you're interested in signing up, please go there. Silicon Valley Robotics, which is the organization that I call my day job, not, although it is also a passion project, is able to assist you if you are a robotics company at any stage. And we have mentor networks, we have events that are topic related or that are related to helping you with your startup. And I'm just wondering, Ken, would you just like to say a few words now about CITRIS, where Ken is the director of the People and Robots Lab, and as well as the research there, there's also the CITRIS Foundry, I believe, and some.
Thank you, Andra. So I want to say we really love to be partnering with you on this. It's a pleasure to work with you. And CITRIS is a University of California, or actually state level organization that connects 4 of the campuses. They are Merced, Davis, Santa Cruz, and Berkeley. And the mission of CITRIS, the acronym stands for it's a Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. So the mission of this series that Andra is organizing is very much consistent with the mission of the center. And my initiative within it is people and robots. So these are really come together very strongly. And this idea of inclusive robotics is something that we're very excited about developing and expanding in the year to come and the years to come. So I really appreciate the discussion we're going to have tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspectives.
Thanks so much, Ken. And you've probably seen that we have a fantastic lineup of speakers tonight. We have Dr. Michelle Johnson, who is at the GRASP Lab at UPenn and actually is the director of the Rehabilitation Robotics Lab at the GRASP Lab and the Associate Professor of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. We have Dr. Ariel Anders, and she is the first technical hire at Robust.ai and is also a board member for Women in Robotics. We have Alka Roy, who is the founder of the Responsible Innovation Project and is working on building delight, trust, and inclusion into technology and AI. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Then we have, getting my notes out of order here. Then we have Kenechukwu Mbanesi who is a roboticist, and my notes are totally out of order now, and is a member of Black in Robotics, and he will be able to speak to us a little bit about Black in Robotics, as will Kenya Andrews, who's a computer engineering master's student at the University of Illinois and on the undergraduate committee of Black in Robotics. And of course, Ken Goldberg, who is the director of the People and Robots Lab at CITRIS and the distinguished William S. Floyd Jr. Chair in Engineering at UC Berkeley, and is not only a roboticist, but an artist. And I love the cross-disciplinary perspective that brings to the discussion. And without more from me now, I think we've given all of the stragglers time to join the conversation. I would like to introduce Dr. Michelle Johnson.
Thank you, Andra. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I was really intrigued by the title, Inclusive Robotics. What is it? Why do we want it? And what do we need to do to have it? And as I was pondering the title, two clear thoughts came to mind. First, I thought inclusive robotics means designing robots that reflect the diversity of society in terms of culture and race. That was the first thought. The second thought was that inclusive robotics means, to me, designing robots that are usable in all types of settings, in low resource and high resource settings, in high income countries and low and middle income countries, that benefit all types of people at different socioeconomic status, and not just in the US or the UK or in Europe, but all over and globally. So those are two thoughts that were kind of really present with me as I thought about this. I wanted to just expand on those two thoughts a little and explain a bit about what I mean by that. So going back to the first idea that we should be thinking about designing robots that reflect the diversity of society in terms of culture and race. When I'm in the healthcare area and my PhD's in ME, and I've been thinking about designing robots for people with disabilities for a long time. And as we suggest that robots will be taking care of us and being seen as some type of assistance to our clinicians or to our elders or to people in general, I think that this is where we really need to start thinking about how we design them, how do we train them using the AI and their functional goals. A couple of examples of why this is important. I was talking to a colleague recently about his face recognition software. And something he said to me struck me. He said, oh yeah, our face recognition softwares really have a hard time detecting people with darker skin. And I thought, okay, so where were the AIs? How were the AIs trained? So, this idea that as we train some of our systems, they're being trained maybe not enough on a diversity of people, but they are then not able to function well when meeting the diversity of people that we encounter. So that's an example of what I mean by kind of designing them to really think about the diversity of society in terms of culture and race. Another thought is recently in my lab, we've been talking about social robot design and thinking about robots for children with disabilities and doing remote telehealth. And one of the discussions that we had was, how do we make sure that this robot, when someone looks at it, can be, they can see themselves partnering with it, and they don't automatically assume that this robot is white or this robot is any particular race or color, but that they can actually form a collaboration with the system. And so we talked about developing a robot that kind of can be seen as multicultural. And in fact, we did an exercise with my class that I taught this past fall about asking them to interact with the robot and asking them about issues of diversity and gender and race, and that whether interacting with the robot engendered any of those thoughts. So that's kind of, I think we need to do a better job of including a cross-section of people in our development process, in our discussion about what is ideal. Just another quick anecdote. There's a paper that came out that said social robots should have eyes with pupil. And when you looked at the methods section, the majority of the people that they had surveyed were white, and they had blue eyes or eyes that you saw distinct pupil. And so I was like, okay, well, of course, then that makes sense that now you're going to say that robots should have, pupil, because the variety of people that you're surveying, that's what they're used to seeing. While if you surveyed, people with darker eyes or browner, but you're not going to see a distinct pupil. So that's not going to be a big deal with those. So that's just another anecdote of, we need to be careful as scientists and as developers to really consider who we're talking to, so that we're not, and that was a kind of well-bred paper. And I'm thinking, oh, why didn't anyone ask that question? Maybe because, I think the responsibility is on the designer and the person developing it to make sure that their population that they're querying reflects this cross-culture and gender. And I think if we do that, we're going to see robots that are more inclusive, and we won't have these, at least we'll have less of these anecdotal stories that I'm pointing out. The second point about robots should be usable by all, just quickly, is that came out of kind of some work that I'm really passionate about, affordable robots in global health. Because as I look back at robot-assisted therapy and the systems that we develop, I find that wholeheartedly they're quite expensive, and they really haven't penetrated low and middle income countries yet. In terms of stroke, 80% of the strokes and the functional impairments that are resulting are outside of high income countries. So there's this disparity in terms of, here is this technology that we're proving to be able to possibly support in areas that have low resource, not enough clinicians, where you might be able to leverage technology to support recovery after stroke or upper extremity impairment, but yet still we have not been able to penetrate these areas because the systems are way too expensive. So, I mean, my lab has been passionate about, how do we develop systems that are not only effective, but affordable and able to be used in these low resource settings. So that's kind of my two things. And I think more of us need to kind of be thinking about those things. And I see sometimes we are thinking about like better and better and better, and cooler and cooler tech, but the translation of that tech into communities globally, I think, is missing. So that's my second point about inclusion in robotics. I'll stop there, Andrea. I think I made my main points.
No, that was excellent, and I think they were very clear points. I've been penciling down some questions myself. If anybody else has questions specifically for Michelle, or questions about the subjects that she's raised, you can table them in the chat, and we will definitely get to them. I'm looking forward to hearing what other angles on the discussion of what is inclusive robotics and how do we get it that we're going to uncover tonight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Ariel Anders, who is the first technical hire at Robust.ai and on the board of Women in Robotics.
So that was a really great talk. I'm excited to try to follow up. I think I have some similar ideas, and I really appreciate Michelle's comments on, how do we, we keep pushing the envelope of what robots can do, but they're not necessarily going to everyone. And so to start, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to talk and share some of my ideas about inclusive robotics. If you've been able to see some of my recent presentations, I've been trying to get into the habit of introducing myself and providing a little bit of background and context. And I think that for this talk, the important thing here is that I am a human being. And I think that when we think about inclusive robotics and the questions that Andra asked us speakers to share our thoughts on, it should come from this part of our humanity. And there are the three questions, what is inclusive robotics? Why do we need it? And what do we need to do to have it? I think that my answers today, I'm kind of excited that we're on Zoom and it looks like this is recorded because I am curious to see, what do I think in a decade or so on some of my thoughts here. And I think we're going to continue growing and learning and just reiterating on this process. And, we really should start having these discussions more and more, especially from people like myself who really generally did not work so much in the idea of human-robot interaction. A lot of my previous work was in programming robots to do new capabilities. So I'm really excited to share my ideas and what my kind of first impression thoughts are here. And to start off with, when I think about, what is inclusive robotics, I think, what does it mean to be inclusive? And my definition of inclusive is belonging. So going with that, inclusive robotics is creating robots that belong in our world. I think that belonging, that word, to me has a lot of implications on what type of robots we'll have. Sorry, I think my dog's also very excited about that idea. Hopefully you guys can still understand me. I'll try to speak over her. In terms of what does it mean for a robot to belong, it should be safe. It should be a robot that's comfortable around us. We should be comfortable to have it around. We want to make sure the robots are, if they belong, they're probably not hurting people because that would exclude others. I think there's a question about the appropriate use of robotics, kind of going along what Michelle said. It should not be something that alienates more people. It should be something that doesn't exploit all our resources. It should be something that's accessible. And to me, it should also be something that society wants. We want robots that are trustworthy and they work, and we want to have them around. And most importantly, in this very kind of circular definition, when I say people, I really do mean all human beings. And so when I think about this, robots that are trustworthy and safe and they work and we want them around, to me, it makes sense that we we would want robots like that. I think the question really is, why do we want this definition to include everyone? And I honestly can't answer that for you, but I can refer to an expert. Maya Angelou has a wonderful quote on diversity, and that it makes for a rich tapestry. And we must understand that all threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color. I think that when we think about robotics, it is incredibly important to think about creating robots for marginalized groups. It's not just for people who can pay for them. That being said, how do we get there? And I honestly don't know how, but I think we should follow the principle of nothing about us without us. And that means we should try to make sure we have a diverse demographic creating robots. We need people from all backgrounds. Otherwise, there's no way we're going to get there. So the other idea there is just to keep in mind as we continue going forward with our robotics development is to remember that we are all humans. And I do want to share a little bit of a personal story here. Back when I was an undergrad, I had the opportunity to present my research at Abercrombie's, and our keynote speaker was Maya Angelou, which is incredible that I got to see her. And I can't paraphrase, I can't even summarize exactly what she said, but she really solidified the point home that we are all human beings. And I think that's the message I want to share with you when we go to make our robotics more inclusive. That's kind of my short presentation on what I think inclusive robotics is.
Thank you, Ari. That was great, and beautiful quotes from Maya Angelou as well. And I'm getting such a lot of rich material from the discussion that's going on in the chat about what is a multicultural robot that Michelle raised. And, you know, your very clear points, nothing about us without us. And, you know, I'm thinking we have a lot of issues about where we cite the responsibility along the production of robots. And I think everybody kind of wishes that it's somebody else's responsibility to do this. And quite often we're reaching the production of robots with great big problems somewhere or other along this production process. There is nothing is working together collaboratively to develop appropriate robotics. So I'm starting to get some thoughts myself around this process, and you know, already. So thank you both for inspiring us there. What I should do is introduce our next speaker. Alka Roy is the founder of the Responsible Innovation Project, and you're currently visiting faculty at Berkeley, I believe, as well, Alka.
Yes, hi. I was just trying to figure out how to share my screen on my new computer. Sometimes simpler is better. So let me know if it works. No, it doesn't work. So, all right. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this. I was actually more excited to hear what everyone was going to say than what I was going to say. I'm definitely not making robots, which I think I congratulate you for inviting an outsider to comment on this. But I do have a lot of opinions about it. Why not? And I think more and more people should have opinions about this. So I really am trying to see if I can still share my screen, because I wanted to share a framework with you that I'm hoping we would think about. My provocation tonight is very different because when I first got invited, and I heard inclusive robots, I said, I don't want to attend this event because, or at least speak to it, because I'm not sure if robots should be inclusive and what does it really mean? And so I've been just thinking and thinking and thinking about it. And because I actually believe that certain things should be excluded. And so let me explain what I mean by that. I'm working on, or I have a responsible innovation framework that, again, this is 1 person at a time. Can I just share my screen, or?
You should be able to do it on the green share screen at the bottom of your screen.
Right. So my security settings are not allowing it. All right. So what let me see. Give me 1 more second. If I can, I'll just talk to it. All right. So I will put my link in the website, and we'll have another time to share this. But so I'm the founder of the Responsible Innovation Framework. And prior to that, I was at an innovation center in Palo Alto, where we were making a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about. And what happened for me was I was at the end of kind of 5G and AI and everything. So we were enabling anything that, mobility can enable, and immersive experiences, robotics. And in the middle of all of these discussions, I found a lot of voices missing, and which were community voices or people, or even when cities were involved, it was usually their CTO that was coming in, not people who were thinking about the impact of society. And I kept raising the point until it got so loud for myself that I had to kind of feel like I had to take a break or choose sides. And so I stepped out of that arena and took a break. And this whole world happened with COVID, which has been a really interesting place for reflection for all of us. One of the things that I worked on last year is this responsible innovation framework, which is like a nested 3x3x3, which is why I was hoping I could show you the visual. But just go with me, and I will try to create it for you. So the first thing in there is the provocation for where robotics, which is I'm really excited to see what you're going to think about it and how you're going to disagree with me and how you're going to tell me I'm wrong, is I think that we need to think about stakeholders differently. So we have people, with everybody talked about, and really people, not customers, not clients, people. Then we have the planet and the environment, physics, our laws, all those things. The third stakeholder is technology, things. So I call it people, planet, things. And the reason I put that as a separate stakeholder is because I think, or my provocation is that the reason we design technology so problematically, including robots and chatbots and digital twins, is because we don't separate people and things. Because we try to build things in our own image, or the image of something living. So we're taking an inanimate thing and creating it in that image. Animation world is full of it. And that causes a lot of confusion for us, because we transfer our feelings, we transfer our biases, we transfer our confusion to these inanimate objects. And now there's so much research and where people are, feeling things about the robot, which they've created a robot to sort of clear the minefield, but when they see this robot getting blown up, they stop and they remove the robot because they're feeling that this robot is doing more than it was designed to do. There's a reason to create social and empathetic robots. I get it. But I think that in that process, we create teenage girls, we create women as our servers, and we just perpetuate this bias. We can't decouple. So my provocation is, why not design robots as things, useful things, but not in our image, not in our voice. And so that we don't transfer, it just appears as a thing, and we treat it as a very useful thing that communicates and helps us, and it's technology. So those are, that's like basic provocation for me as stakeholders. The other aspects of this responsible innovation framework includes the values of open and safe, which are conflicting values, but both needed, delightful and trustworthy, and inclusive and dependable. And their inclusion is about people and ideas and types of people. And the reason I say delightful and trustworthy is because whenever we talk about responsibility or doing the right thing, we get bored, like we feel like we have to be very serious and boring. Whereas I think that's the part of robotics design, which is very delightful for us. And I loved what Michelle said. And I think Ariel said about, we're always looking ahead. We feel like we have to be chasing the latest and the greatest, but there's so much for us to learn from our withering technology, the old stuff, and make things accessible, around the world. So I hopefully at some point I'll get to share this framework with you, but those are my provocations for this conversation. I'd love to hear what other folks have to say about that. So thank you.
Thanks, Alka. And I could see some people are very positive about what you're saying there. I have to agree that the good design framework is to not create something that is perpetuating stereotypes, because we do anthropomorphize and it triggers our unconscious biases and stereotypes. And I see some more conversations coming, but I think it's time to introduce Kenechukwu Benisi from the Black in Robotics Undergraduate Committee, and he's currently doing a PhD in robotics engineering at Worcester, I can't say that, Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. And I'm looking forward to learning more about that. Over to you.
All right. Hello. Sorry, I was just trying to get my sharing going on here. Just give me 1 second. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much for the privilege to be here to join this conversation today. I've benefited a lot just by listening to what the previous speakers have talked about. I want to take this discussion somewhat piggybacking on what Ariel ended with, about how one way we can achieve inclusive robotics is by getting people from all backgrounds involved in robotics engineering. For a long time, I've been very passionate about the power that robotics and technology has to provide improved quality of life and socioeconomic benefits for people in underserved and underrepresented communities, especially on the African continent. And that's really where my passion lies. And you see it, I see exclusivity, which is the inverse of inclusivity, is caused by two things. And it could be more, but in my understanding, it's two things. One is discrimination, in other words, unequal opportunity. And second is limitation, more or less unequal access, right? And my passion really lies in addressing the unequal access problem. And how I envision that is using education, right? So how can we get more people who otherwise would not have a seat at the table of discussing and developing robotics technologies to be able to do that by providing them the means through education. And I've been very privileged to be part of interesting projects with this goal in mind, and I would like to share a few of that with you. The first project is Math and Science for Sub-Saharan Africa. This project was supported by the World Bank, and our audacious goal was to run a continent-wide train-the-trainer program to upskill STEM teachers to teach math and science and robotics, and really to understand their interconnectedness, right? So how does science and math inspire people to pursue engineering and robotics? And so our thinking was that if we could inspire and educate teachers well, they would in turn educate and inspire students, right? And so we started this in 2016, and we've been able to partner with government education agencies on the continent to run training programs in person and virtually in several African countries. And just to put a plug in here, one of the major challenges that we've faced in this project is, and we really still do, is accessing affordable educational robotics kits at scale. We were very fortunate to get Vex Robotics to donate a couple of kits, but beyond that, we still see that as a significant bottleneck to getting students and teachers access to kits that can really help them learn and participate. The second project is Cobot for Kids, where Cobot stands for Collaborative Robots. And this project was supported by the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute here in the US. And the project was designed really to combat the current gaping shortfall of skilled manufacturing talent in the US, and particularly trying to address that in an inclusive way, right? So what we're doing really was to swim upstream to inspire and train middle and high school students, especially from underrepresented backgrounds, to be passionate about robotics and passionate about advanced manufacturing, by taking them through 7-week after-school program, a 7-week after-school program, where we teach them about how to program collaborative robots. We're using the UR robots you can see on the screen, and to actually teach them how to manufacture items using CNC machines, lathe machines, and other things. And really our vision was that this hands-on experiential learning opportunity would inspire them to be passionate about this and to help with getting them into these programs, maybe in college, and to really retain, to increase retention so that they can actually go and pursue robotics in the future. And the last project is one I got involved in very recently, and it's very dear to my heart. It's the Pan-African Robotics Competition. It started in 2015, really small, but right now it's grown to be probably the largest robotics competition on the continent. And really it was designed with inspiration from First Robotics, if you're familiar with that here in the US, really with a goal to inspire the next generation of roboticists on the continent. And we are seeing very strong participation and significant impact on how students are motivated to not just be consumers of this technology, but to have the confidence that they can be part of the producers of the technology, right? They can be part of people who actually develop this technology. And that's really where my passion lies. And so this competition is going on every year, and we get students from all the way down from middle school, all the way up to college level students in, to program robots, to compete with each other, and to just really inspire them. So really to summarize, I'm a very relentless believer in the future of true inclusion. And one way I'm striving for that, as this short presentation shows, is by working to provide young people, particularly people from underrepresented communities, with access to education that, and skill development that allows them to not only be at the table where they can develop technology in a way that's diverse, but also benefit from the dividends of the technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenechukwu. That's I'm looking forward to learning more about all of those initiatives. Particularly, I think Ari raised an interesting point. There can be a lot of education initiatives. How can we maximize the benefit as well as the access, rather than splintering or fragmenting success? And I know that Open Robotics is very keen to democratize access to robotics by putting forward access to simulations to get around some of the cost of having access to physical robots. But of course, that requires access to internet. And we're seeing even in the United States that there is a complete gap between those that have access to internet for education and those students who for the last year have really struggled because of lack of access to the internet. And I don't know what steps we need to take. I think we'll discuss that a little bit more as the discussion moves on, but I would like to introduce our next speaker, Kenya Andrews,
a master's student in computer engineering at the University of Illinois, and on the Black in Robotics undergraduate committee.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Um, and I didn't bring slides, so I'm just going to, speak. So I'm gonna first talk about a little bit about my background and kind of where I fit in the space, and then I'm gonna go into the topic. So I'm a first-year master's student, and I live in the space where we make algorithms, right? And those are the things that are the decision-making properties of robots, right? So that's the space that I'm in. My focus in my research is in machine learning fairness, and within that, my passion areas in that are algorithmic justice, algorithmic bias, and decision making. Okay, so my current project is looking at fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccinations amongst vulnerable populations at the state of Ohio. And right now we're looking at different measures, trying to build different models. So some of the things that we've kind of tossed around are like, well, should there be equal hospitalization rates between vulnerable and non-vulnerable people? Would that make it fair, or would it be more fair if every like census tract or center would have the same amount of vaccines distributed to them? So, and we've been, having to work around things like distrust between historical, because of historical injustice and things like that, how that creates distrust amongst vaccines and how that affects distribution. So hopefully that gives you a little context for where I'm coming from. Okay, so when I first saw inclusive robotics, I thought first, well, oh, that's a loaded topic. Let's let's break down some definitions. So first, I wanted to look at, well, what is a robot? And it's a programmable machine that does a task, with or without human assistance. And then I wanted to look at, well, what is inclusion? That's where I started having some issues, because we don't have a real agreement on what inclusivity looks like. And it's not because, it's for different reasons, right? Like maybe it's like you don't agree with someone's lifestyle, so you don't want to include them in things, or I think I should have more because I do more, I work more, right? So it creates, these biases around if people should be or should not be. So I went to Oxford, and some of their definitions were not excluding any of the parties or groups involved in something, and aiming to provide equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded. So putting those two things together, I thought about, well, we want to have robots that make smart decisions to achieve, different goals in this world, right? And it's not like, it's not just that we want them to do things, we want them to do them well, right? So unless they can do them well, then maybe they shouldn't do it at all, right? That's what, that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So this analysis of if robots are doing something well should encompass, are they being just? Are they being fair in the decisions that they're dishing out? And in order to look at that, it kind of needs to start from the beginning of the algorithm, and not, at the end. There are several stages of that people look at fairness, and one of them is at the end, that all the outcomes at the end come out good. What about when you were making the decision? So that's another scheme of fairness, like where the in-between stages between the decisions good? Were they fair? That's what I mean by good. So I do want to, hopefully you guys can hear me a little bit. I want to talk about a few definitions of fairness. So hopefully that can bring some context into where we are. So some definitions of fairness are unawareness. So that's when we exclude different attributes of people, so that from data, even though it's there, we know it's there, we don't look at it, we just ignore it. And that can be really dangerous, because if you ignore those things, then you would be ignoring the historical injustice that comes with it, right? So if you ignore the fact that someone is a Black or a brown person, then you would be ignoring the injustice that they had to face to get where they are, and how that could have affected what we look at as their resume, right? So maybe they don't look qualified to you, but if we consider the things that affected their resume, then we can start to see, actually maybe they are qualified, or maybe even more qualified than someone, who has a similar or equal resume. Another definition of fairness is demographic parity. And that's when you look at if all the demographics in a data set have equal outcomes, right? Like if white, Black, Asian, Indian people are accepted at the same rate or rejected at the same rate. And grouping demographics together can completely cancel another demographic that they could be a part of, right? So it's not only race. What about, oh, they're short, they're tall, what about age, things like that. So you could completely be ignoring someone else's a part of their person if you group them together like that. That's the danger in that. And then there's something called equalized odds. And that's if you're qualified, that you're equally as likely to be accepted into something as someone else. And another one is equality of opportunity. So regardless of your demographic group, you're equally as qualified to have something as someone else or rejected as someone else. And then there's predictive parity. And that's when it's very similar to demographic parity, and it's when the positive rates are the same. Okay, lastly, I'll go over, sorry, we're almost at the end. Lastly, I'll go over counterfactual fairness. And that's if the outcome for you is the same if you're in this world where you are who you are versus, if you had a different set of demographics. So instead of being a short Black woman, then I would be a Caucasian woman. Do I have the same outcome, right? So those things are important, because when we look at robotics and the decisions that they're pushing out, what measure of fairness are we going by? And which one is most appropriate for our context? It changes all of the time. So we have to be very careful when we're designing robots, and understanding what kind of space are they going to be in, and who are they going to be working with. Sorry, I'm reading my notes. 1 second. Okay, yes. We want to make sure that we're not promoting disparity, but that we are minimizing it or mitigating it, right? So how can we do that? Some things that I really think we should do is just kind of take a step back and slow down. We need to look at where we are right now and come to agreement on what inclusivity looks like. And once we all can sign off on that, we need to understand how we make decisions, because we don't even have a great understanding of that. We need to know, what is it that we're saying is good or bad, and why are we saying that? If the things that reason our why are bad, then maybe that shouldn't be in our design, right? Or the reasons that are good, you know, maybe we need to superimpose those and make them even larger, make them count more. And another way, after we have a good understanding of that and we're developing good things, I think we have to start investing then, right? Like if you're designing things for a community, a robot for a community that's going to be specific to a community, maybe you should go to some of the community meetings and sit and understand their struggles, the things that they are actually going on there, so that you have a real understanding. You need to support organizations like NSBE, right? The National Society of Black Engineers, or Women in Robotics, right? Support them with your funds, support them with your knowledge, volunteer to speak. Even students, tell students about robotics and what it looks like. But while you're telling them about robotics, take them to African American museums, take them to the Holocaust museums, show them, teach them moments in history where we weren't so fair, we weren't so just, we weren't so inclusive, and how those things can translate over into our lives. Start a scholarship fund, be a mentor. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that. So thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much, Kenya. You raised great points, and it was wonderful to have the definitions there. And what I like most is that you took it back to saying starting with the algorithm. And this is something that is both critically important and also crucially problematic at the moment, because right now robotics has become a subset of AI. And that means that federal policies on AI are incorporating robotics. It means that the agenda is being driven around the discussion around AI and AI ethics. And it is often being done in complete ignorance with robotics. And some of the problems there is that if the discussion is only about robotics, then it may only be about safety rather than algorithmic transparency. But at the same time, if the discussion is primarily about the algorithm, then it's going to be excluding the impacts of physical robots. And they just have a completely a different and expanded way of intersecting with us in society. So I love that you started with the AI in that discussion. And let me just see if Ken would like to speak now. And
thank you. Good, thank you, Andra. I appreciate that. I am really inspired by a lot of this discussion, and I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that the event tonight is sandwiched between two major events, at least in the United States. One is Martin Luther King Day, which we celebrated yesterday, and tomorrow, which is the inauguration. And it will be approximately 15 hours or so. We will have a new president of the United States, a new administration, which I don't know how others feel about that, but I, for one, am very happy about it. I think that it's important because it is going to, we are at an opportunity, a new chapter in American history, which I think will affect a lot of events globally. I think as one thing that struck me is that that as Kenya just mentioned, the COVID vaccines process is going to be very interesting re-examination of our sense of inclusivity, because we are going to have to think very carefully and deeply about how we prioritize the vaccine. It's been very interesting to me that that seniors and healthcare workers, prisoners, incarcerated individuals have been prioritized with good reason. But it's very interesting because they're often not considered in our priorities, and so it's been forcing us to reconsider. And I think as the more vaccines become available, we're going to have to do some really careful thinking about how this is rolled out. It's going to cause a re-examination. And I want to note that this pandemic has woken us up in so many ways. It was 100 years ago that the 1918 pandemic occurred, and I was reflecting on the idea that the word robot was coined in 1920, right after the end of the pandemic. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea that it was such an interesting context, right? They had just gone through World War and this horrendous threat to humanity. And that's when the playwright Karel Čapek in Czechoslovakia basically comes up with this story about robots rebelling against the totalitarian regime that was basically forcing them to work. And that's where the word robot originated. So 100 years later, I think that thinking about robots in this context of our political, economic, social environment is so important. And so I think that the points that were raised here from the beginning from Michelle characterizing, what are we, what is our definition? Because I think that's so hard to actually wrap our heads around. I mean, we can talk about, seniors and children age as a sort of inclusivity, right? That's one very big factor. Then there's, and one we didn't talk about tonight, but gender and LGBTQT, right? There's all the gender issues that have come to the fore actually this year, and race issues. I mean, Black Lives Matter. I think that the BIPOC, the whole idea of thinking about in new ways, that has created a lot of shifting of attention and priorities in a really positive way. I can tell you that Black in Robotics and Black in AI have had a big influence this year on our admissions process at Berkeley. We're right now reviewing applicants, and we are giving a lot of attention. We've gotten more applicants than ever before, more Black applicants than ever before, and 2 of them are here actually. And I want to say it's wonderful because and what's really important is that we're learning and educating the faculty that what's important is not just looking at the scores, how many papers they're writing, but what has their trajectory been? So if a student has come from adversity in a small village and in Africa, and now is an undergraduate at, doing, well in classes, that's a huge trajectory. I mean, that means they're imagine what they had to overcome to get there. So really think about that in regard to how you're evaluating that student. They may not have a published paper, but they're on a trajectory to do, nothing's going to stop them, right? So I think this is really fascinating, and it's a really powerful and important time. That I also think in terms of other, races, we talked about, you opened tonight, Andra, with talking about Native Americans and Aboriginal people. I think it's really important. We also consider Hispanic, Indian, the full spectrum of races that are out there, and languages. By the way, a big disparity that excludes many people is the language they speak. There's an emphasis on English in a lot of the publications, but that is very difficult that it's not your native language. So you have a barrier to overcome in the way you read and write. We need to think about how to overcome that. Even our conversation tonight is in English, and the translation, nowadays, some of these tools, and AI again comes into play, are going to open up these doors, and I hope they will increase in quality so that we can have simultaneous translation. And for example, for people with hearing disabilities, having ability to have automated translation, closed captioning is wonderful thing. We've been using it in our classes. I have a student who's hearing disabled, and we use this for all of our meetings. So it's opened a huge amount of doors. There are all kinds of disabilities in regard to cognitive diversity or neurodiversity. And people have learning disabilities. We're finding out today with COVID-19 that the kind of learning disabilities is much greater than we thought before. Students have all kinds of challenges, and that is also important to acknowledge. And also, as Michelle noted, the socioeconomic variations, right? We are oftentimes targeting this kind of particular, people who can afford these kind of robots and tools, and even who have Wi-Fi in their homes, right? But many people do not. So how do we think about that? And also, I also think that intellectually, we also tend to target, in the inclusivity in terms of the people developing it are oftentimes, nerds like me, engineers, right? We're people who feel pretty good about doing science and math, STEM, but many people don't. They just don't have that they're not comfortable there, and but they feel excluded. So how do we engage with people who are the artists and the humanists and the writers, the journalists, who are so engaged across the board? So all of these things, and workers are oftentimes affected by the robots that we're we're developing. So we need to be engaging with workers and really thinking carefully about how is this going to affect those workers, especially minimum wage, who are, at most vulnerable to these technologies. So there's so many things that this is sort of, engaging for me. And I have to say, Keay, I have not met you before, but I'm so excited to follow up with you because we have a common background in Nigeria. I was born there in the 60s. And what those programs you mentioned, I'm not aware of, but they're fascinating because we started something called the African Robotics Network with a professor in Ghana, and it's been a little bit in the first objective of it. This was in 2012, was to build an ultra affordable robot for education, to design an ultra affordable, and the challenge was to design something under $10. So we thought nobody could ever do that. It's a programmable robot for under $10. Anyway, it turned out that someone did, and it was a hobbyist living in Thailand who basically came up with what he calls the Lollybot. And if you look it up on the internet, it's LOLLYBOT, the Lollybot, and it costs $8.64. So you can build it from an old Sony game controller. Anyway, what I want to say is I love what you're saying because I completely agree with this. That is a big opportunity. I am very excited about Africa and its potential. I think that is a major continent that is going to accelerate into the future. And one of the things that African students I found are really an incredible ability is to know how to think outside the box in a way that they think differently because of their experience. So they're very, very attuned to how to make something affordable and sustainable, how to make something that works even when the electricity goes out, which nobody in the West usually thinks about. But those kind of things are really important. And they're as engaged and interested in robots as any kid anywhere. So that's why I want to be able to bring them to robots. So the programs that you're talking about, like the Pan-African Robotics Competition, I absolutely love it. So I want to connect with you because I would really like to follow up. But that is one of the things I think we can do as the group of us tonight, which is we are forming a community. I mean, what I feel is that there's a real sense of some grassroots thing happening here, and I'm so excited. And I want to thank you, Andra, for pulling this group together because there's a spark here that I want to support, and I really want to see that grow over the next few years. And I think we are at a moment in time, historical moment, when this is an opportunity for us to step forward and really take this opportunity and do something with it, carry it forward in a really meaningful and sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was a very wonderful note to finish on. And sadly, for tonight, we are out of time, but the problem space is enormous. But it's fitting to realize that the opportunity space is even larger. And I personally had thought a lot, what would a robot look like if it was designed by women for women? And I could imagine things being different. But imagine now what it would look like if your language models were for languages other than English, or if you had to rise to the challenge of developing language models for multiple languages, as is the case in Africa. And I love the examples that Ken gave us there as well about really thinking outside of the box. It's been proven fairly scientifically that diversity drives innovation, and it might not be as comfortable, but it is certainly far more productive if you're looking to make change, as well as creating something that's inclusive. So we shall have to continue this discussion and extend this discussion into our workplaces and to the rest of the people around us, because we need to get everybody in the room. And I'm looking forward to taking that journey with you all. And thank you so much tonight. It's wonderful speech. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and say goodnight to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.